All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's just a minute or two after 6, so we are going to get started as folks still trickle in. Um, my name is Chandra Legui. I'm the Western Oregon Field Coordinator for Oregon Wild, based in Eugene. And for those of you who might be new to Oregon Wild, we are a statewide conservation organization dedicated to protecting and restoring Oregon's wildlands, wildlife, and waters as a lasting legacy for Oregonians. That also means fungi, by the way. Before we introduce tonight's webcast, I do have just a few housekeeping items, so listen up. If your screen suddenly freezes or you can't see or hear the presenters anymore, just try closing completely out of your browser and restarting it and rejoining the webcast with the link that you were sent. That usually fixes things. We are recording tonight's webcast, so if you have to leave early or something goes wrong, we will email you a link tomorrow with the recorded video, and that way you're also free to share with friends. We'll also post it on the Oregon Wild website. Tonight we are going to have a Q&A session after the presenter is done, so you can enter questions at any time using the little question bubble, which is illustrated on the screen here. Those questions will go to me, and then at the end I'll compile them and ask the very best questions of Bruce. So try to get your questions in as soon as you can and not wait till the very last minute, or I might miss them. I know many of you bought tickets to our raffle this evening, and we really appreciate your support for that. Those funds from the raffle help us put on presentations like this and also do other important conservation work. So tomorrow morning we'll do that drawing and email the winners. So watch your email if you bought one of those tickets. And finally, I want to mention that we have a great lineup of fall webcasts coming at you Wednesdays at 6 o'clock almost every week. So you can check those out, sign up and join us for all sorts of interesting topics, from exploring diversity in the outdoors, including the one that's advertised here on your screen in a couple of weeks, with Next Adventure, the store in Portland, and how they're putting together camping kits for the BIPOC community. We also have webcasts coming up about wolverines, about glacier research, and about painting wild and scenic rivers in Oregon. So lots of good stuff coming up. So watch OregonWild.org for that. Okay, housekeeping over. Tonight's topic is one that is near and dear to my heart. And actually I'm going to advance my slide here. Being a nature nerd, who loves to look at all things in the forest, big and small. Fungi are just so fun to discover and learn about. So these are just a few of the various fungi and mushrooms that I've gotten to know over the years, some of them on trips with our presenter tonight. And I just find them fascinating and really just mind-blowing, the diversity that's out there tying the ecosystem together, especially in our ancient forests, which I'm prone to loving more than any others. So in normal years, our guest presenter this evening would be leading a mushroom outing for Oregon Wild out of Eugene. Participants get to tromp around in the woods on public lands, often taking home edible prizes along with new knowledge. So we're sad we can't offer that trip this year, but I'm really excited that Bruce Newhouse can be with us virtually to share his enthusiasm for wild mushrooms and their habitats with us all tonight. So when Bruce isn't doing ecological consulting in his day job, he's, as he put it, overoccupied with hunting, teaching, and talking about mushrooms and fungi every fall, including at the Mount Pisgah Arboretum Mushroom Festival, which is one of Oregon's best events. And that's happening virtually this year. So I hope it's going to be great in that format as well. So thanks for joining us, Bruce, and I will let you take it away for the next 40 minutes or so. Let me give you presenter powers here, and I'll let you take it away.
Okay. Yeah.
I know we
Show my screen.
practiced.
Here we are. It's always right in front of my face. Okay. Thank you, Shauna, for the nice introduction. And welcome everyone to an evening to talk about wild mushrooms, fungi. And before I get started, maybe a couple of things just really quickly. I'll let you know that I did grow up here in the Willamette Valley, but more around the Portland area. And I've spent most of my adult life pretty much down in the Eugene area down here. So I'm a local homegrown and probably full of fungi to myself personally, as we all are. And there's a couple of people I'd like to acknowledge. One is a former Oregon wild person named Wendell Wood, who died a couple of years ago, several years ago now, in the Redwoods. What a way to go. He was an instructor and a wonderful instructor for me and a lot of people, and mushrooms were one of his favorite topics as well. And then very, very recently, my big personal mentor in fungi, Freeman Rowe, passed away here in Eugene. So that was expected, but I just wanted to say, Freeman, I hope you're out there walking the trails and finding wonderful mushrooms somewhere. So tonight I'm going to talk about a huge topic. Fungi is actually a really, really big topic, and I'm going to talk about it in about 40 minutes. So it's going to be a little bit condensed. I'm going to talk to you about different ecological roles of fungi first, and what fungi do out there in the woods and in the environment. And then I'll finish with a little bit of talk about different edible kinds of fungi and different ways of cooking them and preserving them. So let's get started with that. Okay, brief foray into forest fungi with a focus on macrofungi. I'm going to tell you what that means in just a second here. What are fungi? Fungi or fungi or fungi or however you want to say it. It's actually got different words in different languages too. Some of the other languages I know are ongo in Spanish, take in Japanese, pilz in German, and champignon in French. So it's telling you it's kind of a worldwide phenomenon here. The kingdom of fungi in the biological world, the kingdom of fungi is more similar to animals than it is to plants. Now, is that cool or what? It actually has, we're more connected as human beings, we're more connected in our evolutionary history to fungi than we are to plants. Fungi are a little different than plants because they have cell walls that are made of chitin. Chitin, as you may recognize that word, some insect shells are made of chitin, for example. So the cell walls are a little tougher. And the other thing about fungi is, unlike plants, they don't make their own food. There are a few plants, and actually you'll learn about some tonight, that don't make their own food either. They steal it. But for the most part, plants make their own food. Fungi, like humans, and a few plants do not. There's lots of different kinds of fungi. Small ones like molds that grow on your bread, or yeasts that make beer or make bread. Lichenizing fungi, also called just lichens. And fungi that live inside of trees and other plants, but I'm not really going to talk about those tonight. That'd be another couple of hours with somebody with a different kind of expertise. But I am going to cover the macrofungi, larger ones that you're going to most likely run into when you're out in the forest, or maybe even just down the block. Focusing a little bit on forests, though, how do fungi benefit forests? Well, they break down compounds and nutrients so that plant growth can use those. Plants can use those as they grow up. Things like carbon and nitrogen, you're going to see that show up on a couple of slides here tonight. But they, fungi and sometimes bacteria break those down, and so they're usable by other organisms. The other thing that some fungi do is link trees and other plants together. It's kind of cool. It's sometimes called the forest internet or the wood wide web, if you will. And those are just some of the names for it. But under the ground where the fungi live, they link plants together. So I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail in a couple of slides on here. And one of the reasons we have such incredible forests here in the Pacific Northwest is because we have great diversity of fungi and a lot of rain, doesn't hurt. Great diversity of fungi that's providing them with all those nutrients they need. So the fungi are helping the trees be spectacular. The mushroom that you see growing is really not the fungus, it's just a little part of it. The fungi are comprised of single strands of cells called hypha, or plural, it's hyphae. And en masse, it's called a mycelium, a fungal mycelium, and that's really what the fungus is. But you don't see it very often. It's because it's almost always inside the soil or inside wood and invisible to our eyes. There's some exceptions to that, but that's mainly the fungus. The body of the fungus is this big fungal mycelium. I think I went backwards there, didn't I? Okay. When a fungus reproduces, a macrofungus reproduces, it produces mushrooms, and those mushrooms produce spores. And spores are kind of like seeds, only there's a lot more of them. They're a lot smaller, and there's quite a few differences if you're a botanist or a mycologist. Spores are produced on gills, and they're produced in some mushrooms, and they're produced on teeth and other mushrooms, and pores on some mushrooms, and some just flat surfaces. Here's an example, two examples of a regular sort of mushroom, showing the cap on top, underneath the cap, the gills, sort of paper thin little structures. This is all the same kind of tissue that's in the hyphae. This is just fungal tissue. Underneath the gills is the stem. On the stem, there's usually a little ring or annulus like the mushroom on the left here, and it's the same thing. Annulus just means the ring on the stem, and sometimes that falls right off, so mushrooms have a bare stem, and sometimes it stays on. And that's one way that mushrooms are keyed apart from each other. They're told apart from each other and identified by the presence or absence of that annulus, that ring. So that can be very important. In some cases, like the mushroom on the right, that ring is actually strands. They're little tiny strands, fibers, if you will. And they're pretty much colorless and hard to see unless, as in this case, spores fall on those fibers and color them. In this case, cinnamon colored spores. You can see on the gills, there's little patches of cinnamon from the spores being produced on the gills. And then on the annulus here, a fibrous type of annulus, it's catching those spores, and some of them are sticking on there and coloring that annulus, the same color as the spores. So at the bottom, back to the mushroom on the left, you'll notice at the bottom there's kind of a bulge there. The Amanita mushrooms have a cup at the bottom or a bulge at the base, like this one does, which is very important if you're trying to identify mushroom. You want to dig up the entire mushroom because, first of all, you might want to know if it's an Amanita or not. And if you didn't collect the bottom of the stem, a mycologist, which is a person who studies mushrooms, a mycologist will look at you and say, "Where's the bottom of the stem? I need to see the bottom of the stem." So it's very important that if you're going to collect the whole mushroom and ask somebody what it is, that you collect the whole thing and don't just cut it off and leave the bottom part in there. Now, if you pull it or cut it real low, remember you're not hurting the rest of that fungal mass, that mycelium that's in the soil. It's analogous. A lot of people like to say this. It's analogous to picking an apple off an apple tree. When you pick a mushroom off a fungus, you're not hurting the fungus. You're slowing its ability to reproduce a little tiny bit. But the fungus is probably not any worse off from your picking the mushroom off there. So pick the entire mushroom or dig out around the base, get the entire mushroom, then somebody can help you identify it. So the two mushrooms we have here is on the left, the flying amanita is probably the most famous mushroom in the world. It's in all the children's fairy tales and so on. And the one on the right is the violet cortinarius. Okay, pull it towards me as far, there we go. There's different types and shapes of mushrooms. Those were the classic kind of mushroom shapes that I showed you in that last slide. Here is, I'm gonna go from upper left, just like reading a book, upper left to lower right. Upper left on the top of the mushroom, it's brown and kind of an olive brown and scaly. And you flip it over and it's got pores, it's got little holes in there. And that's where the spores are produced in those pores. The next mushroom is a coating on wood. It's like a coating, basically. That's all it is. And it's producing spores there in that orange coating. The next mushroom you probably all have seen, it's fairly common. It's like little bits of jelly, often called witch's butter, and there's several species and they all look just about alike. It's producing fungus on flatter surfaces, as is now down to the lower left, those little fingers sticking up, those little white fingers, little coral fungi, kind of simplified coral fungi. It's producing its spores just on the surface of those little fingers. The next one is one of my favorite groups, the bird's nest fungi. They look like little bird eggs. Those little nests there could fit easily. Well, they couldn't fit too well over your little pinky finger, but they're less than 1/4 of an inch in diameter. And each little egg inside there is actually a pocket of spores, and a raindrop that hits in that bird's nest might dislodge a couple of those spore packets, and they would then rupture and spread spores around, and those in turn might get carried away by the wind. But it's one method of spore dispersal. That group of fungi is called the bird's nest fungi, and there's quite a few species of those. They're kind of different from a lot of other fungi. And then on the lower right is what's often called a conch, or a little shelf that grows out of the side of a log or a snag or a tree. And in this case, the spores are brown that come out of the pores underneath it, and they float around in the air, and they've landed on top of this thing. And so the dull parts you see are the spores. If you brush them all off, it'd be shiny, like the little shiny parts you see shining through there. That also is a fungus, and its fungal mass, mycelium, is in wood, that particular one. Here's a couple more. Goat's beard mushroom on the left, the coral mushroom on the right. Oftentimes those can be brown, or sometimes yellow, or sometimes kind of tan colored. The lower left is an orange peel fungus, and that one's been shaken, and so the spores that come off the flat top surface of that thing, they're being released. You can actually see them, they look like smoke there. The next one is an underground fungus. I'm going to talk about those. It's like a truffle. I've cut it in half so you see what the inside looks like there. And then the lower right it's a mushroom in some senses. It has a cap and it has a stem, but instead of having gills underneath, it has a little tiny teeth underneath. It's called a hedgehog mushroom. So fungi have several roles. They have 4 roles, primarily that I'm going to talk about. Decay and recycling is done by SAPROBIC fungi. That's just a word for it, or saprophytic fungi. The second group I'm going to talk about is fungi that parasitize, or the predators. The third group I'm going to talk about is mycorrhizal fungi, the fungi that form partnerships with plants and trees. And the fourth is sort of it doesn't fit this 1, 2, 3, 4 group very well. It's fungi have a role as food. They're often eaten by animals and sometimes by humans. So first of all, the saprobes are involved in decay and recycling. As I mentioned earlier, carbon and nitrogen are 2 of the minerals that they really make available to plants that plants are often short of. Saprobic fungi usually grow on wood or on soil. They may be on an insect. They may be actually living off a dying insect, or they may actually parasitize another fungus. I'm going to show you a bright orange example of that here in a couple of minutes. Bacteria do this also. They do decay and recycling also. in partnership with fungi. But without the fungi and the bacteria, just think of how many big piles of dead matter and dead leaves there would be around us. If those things didn't break down and weren't recycled, we would have 20 feet deep of leaves around us without that recycling going on. As I mentioned, they're also called saprophytic fungi. They include many LBMs. That's a fancy way of saying little brown mushrooms. Little brown mushrooms, there's a lot of species of mushrooms that they sort of look like each other. They're small, they're brownish, they're difficult to tell apart. It takes a lot of microscope work and a lot of patience in order to identify those. I don't do that usually. I don't do that. Examples of saprobic fungi, or fungi that are decayers and things that recycle, fungi that recycle, are button mushrooms like you might buy at the grocery store, cremini mushrooms and portabellas that you might buy at the grocery store. And in fact, button mushrooms, creminis, and portabellas are all the same species. They're just different strains that look a little different, so they can charge you more for them. Shaggy parasol mushrooms, shaggy means, and yellow stainers. Yellow stainers. Yellow stainers are probably out in your yard, if not your yard, the neighbors are down the street somewhere. They're coming out in droves right now, they're common in urban areas like Portland and Salem and Eugene and elsewhere. They're probably an invasive species, but people ask me, well, where did they come from them? And I don't know. So I'll have to find that out if they're European in origin or Eastern United States or somewhere else. But about probably 15, 20 years ago, there weren't many of them around here. Now they're all over the place. In California, they've found that some of the edible mushrooms that they used to like Agaricus campestris, have been overrun by the yellow stainers, which are not really edible. So when I do mushroom identification at mushroom shows, for example, probably 3/4 or more of the mushrooms that are brought into me to identify are this species, because they're so ubiquitous and they're so easily seen, and they're so urban. They really like being around urban areas. There's an easy scratch test you can do to see if you got this thing. Just scratch the edge of the cap a little bit and see the photo on the lower right. It probably turned that bright yellow in 5 or 10 seconds. The colder it is, the slower it might take for that to turn yellow. Chemical reactions are generally a little slower when it's colder. On the left, there's a little bit of yellow you can see just starting to come here where he's nicked it with his finger, this fellow did. Very, very common mushroom. You'll see it around a lot. Yellow stainers, don't eat it. It'll give you a stomach upset bad. Here's some more pictures of them. The upper left is a little older. They turn brown, but it shows you they often come up in large numbers. Lower right, they're coming up in a thick clump. They look like marshmallows sometimes when they come up, like little marshmallows. And on the right is an example of young ones, but they've opened up, so they're still real light colored. If you scratched either of these, the bottom ones or the right ones, they would still turn bright yellow. The upper left, the older ones that are brown, you know, if I was going to find out those yellow stainers, I'd try to find the youngest one there I could, and I wouldn't expect much. I might have to say they're just too old to really figure out what kind of agaricus they are. But because there's so many of them, and because these are in an urban area, they're probably yellow stainers. Parasitic fungi is our second group. It includes fungi that are predatory. For example, eating springtail. Springtails are little tiny insects that live in the soil, or are they? Yeah, I think they're insects. They live in the soil, and some fungi make little nooses and tighten the noose around and dissolve and eat the springtails that are moving around in the soil. There's just a couple of species that do that. Other species usually are parasitic on plants. These guys may live with their host for many, many years. And if the host dies, the fungus might still live on it. And at that point, it becomes saprobic, not a parasite, it's a saprobe. So they can switch back and forth. This picture I'm showing you in the bottom right is a highly variable mushroom, but it usually looks like some version of this, sometimes just one of these little ruffles instead of, what have we got here, 30 or 40 or 50 ruffles, just one round piece, but it often has a lighter colored edge, and you flip it over and it has pores that are, they're kind of a weird greenish, brownish color, yucky. But people who dye it with fungi, that is color wool and things with fungi, love this one because it makes all kinds of yellows and greens and browns and beautiful colors, depending on what mordant you use, what you carry that dye with. Fun fungal fact. There's a few of these scattered in the show. What's the largest known organism in the world? Anybody out there know? Raise your hand if you know. Oh, I see a hand. Yes. Okay, it's a fungus. You're right. You're right. The largest known organism in the world is a fungus. In fact, it's a fungal parasite, and it's called a honey mushroom. It's Armillaria ostoyae, and it lives in Oregon. The largest known organism lives in Oregon. It covers over 2,200 acres. I think they've calculated it now at more like 2,400 to 2,500 acres in the Malheur National Forest, estimated to be somewhere in the neighborhood of between 2,500 and 8,500 years old. They're not sure. Recycles nutrients and creates lots of habitat. It isn't great for the forest itself aesthetically, because the forest, it does kill the trees in the forest, but it does create gaps which will eventually be filled by the same species or another species of tree. Now, when I told you that the fungal strands under the soil are usually not visible, I was telling you the truth. They're usually not, but in this case they are. They make these brown, they're called rhizoids, these brownish black rhizoids, and those are plainly visible under the soil. They connect all the trees together, and so this whole, they've determined by doing DNA analysis of samples taken in various parts of the area throughout the 2,200 acres that it's the same exact individual. So it's pretty cool. Michigan has a big one too, and for a while they were seesawing back and forth. We've got the biggest one. No, ours is bigger, and so they kept doing more research. And I think it's settled now that Oregon one might be the biggest one. Here's a picture of it from Google. Prairie City is over by John Day. That's on the left there. And you can see Armillaria ostoyae. That's what the 6 letters are on the right side of the photo, A-R-M-O-S-T, Armillaria ostoyae. That's the approximate location of it. The third group I'd like to talk about briefly is the mycorrhizal fungi. These are they form partnerships. And I'm going to just look at the word for a second. Myco is the Greek word for fungi, and rhiza is the Greek word for roots. So they're actually fungus that are fungi that come in and grab onto and grow around, and actually they penetrate the outer wall of the root itself, but they do not go into the cells of the root. There are other fungi that do that, but they're not in the macrofungi show I'm doing you tonight. So they form this coating on the roots, and then they, turning the other way, they branch out into the soil, and that mycelium makes a huge spider web of fungal fibers out in the soil. Those hyphae are usually not visible, and what they do is they help plants, or specifically trees, survive stress, and they extend their habitat tolerances into places where the soil is a little less nutrient, it's a little more nutrient deficient, it's a little drier than a tree might normally grow in, or even expand the range. Maybe a tree that likes it wetter might extend a little further into a drier area because of the fungus attachment. The fungus gathers soil nutrients like the minerals I've talked about before, carbon and nitrogen, and they're really good at it, they're really efficient at it, and efficient at gathering water. In return, the fungi receive nutrients from the plants. So the plants are photosynthesizing and producing starches and sugars and so forth, and giving some of those to the fungus, and the fungus is exchanging and giving basic minerals and water back to the tree. So it's a two-way relationship Any two things that grow together, it's called symbiosis, where they're both benefiting. It's a specific kind of a symbiosis called mutualism. So it's a mutualistic relationship between the fungus and the tree. Now that fungus might be connected to another tree and a third and 100th tree. So there may be many, many trees connected by this one mycorrhizal network. And there has been some research, there needs to be a lot more, on the fact that this network of fungi can form as a communication between the trees. Like if one tree is attacked by insects, it will send out signals through the mycorrhizal web to the other trees in the area, which can then exude chemicals, enzymes that repel the attack of the insects in those trees. So there's actually some kind of communication going on there, and we're not too sure about what it is. I think the last I heard is there's some electrical connectivity going on there. It may be chemical, it may be electrical. If you can't see the movie Fantastic Fungi, not because it has quite a bit in it about psychoactive fungi, which is not really my thing, but it does have wonderful, wonderful simulations of how these exchanges occur between plants and fungi. It's just visually stunning. The other thing that the fungi can do for the plants is often they can provide a resistance to other pathogens, both through the communication I mentioned, but also physically as a barrier. It keeps other pathogenic fungi from attacking the trees. So some of these fungi, I abbreviated them ECM here, ectomycorrhizal. Some of those fungi have obligate relationships. That means they will only grow with one species of tree. Or in this case, the example I gave, the pink-edged chanterelle here locally does grow with spruce, but it grows with both the coastal Sitka spruce and the Cascades Engelmann spruce. So at the end of the show here, I'm going to show you some pink-edged chanterelles in real life that I got last weekend from some Engelmann spruce up in the Cascades. But those two types of spruce are very, very, very close together chemically and biologically, so they both support the pink-edged chanterelle. Another interesting thing is truffles. What about them? Mushrooms, as you know, are above the soil, and their spores are mostly spread around by the wind, although water could play a part of that and animals could play a part of that, which I'll show you some pictures of that momentarily. But truffles have a whole different strategy, if you will. It implies they have a brain, and maybe they don't, but they have a way of producing. They're below the soil, so they're not going to be spread around by their spores are not going to be spread around by the wind. So it smells the truffle or truffle-like. Truffles are generally what we think of as the edible fungi underground, but there's lots of them that are not edible, and I'm just going to lump those together and call them truffle-like. So the truffles and truffle-like fungi have a smell that's not so obvious to us as we walk around in the woods, but very obvious to, guess who? Dogs and pigs. So they're often used, dogs especially here are used to hunt truffles because their sense of smell is so good. I've heard as good as 10,000 times better than ours. They can smell all those smells. When the spore mass is mature, it's really not pigs and dogs that spread truffles around. It's really rodents more, squirrels and voles and things like that. Dig up these things, they smell them, they want to eat them. And so they oftentimes eat them and thereby spread the spores in their spore. Never thought of that. They spread the spores in their poop, in their animal poop, or they might cache those truffles, like some squirrels will take truffles and stick them in a crotch of a tree and let them dry out a little bit and make a little midden of truffles. And sometimes then the truffles rupture. Maybe other animals split them apart, maybe just dry weather splits them apart, and then the wind might get involved at that point. Another fun fungal fact, oh, I can't wait. So, yeah, this one though I actually kind of touched on it earlier. Fungi feed by exuding enzymes at the tips of their hyphae, which break down matter into substances that then the fungus can take in. So some of those things, nitrogen and carbon again, are given to the trees in trade. And there's so many of these little fibers in the soil that the hyphae can be up to 50% of the total weight of the soil. Wow, 50%. If you hold in a cubic inch of soil in your hand, you can be holding up to 8 miles of fungal hyphae in your hand. That's pretty incredible. I don't like this picture very much, but I think it kind of gives the idea of the extension that fungi can give to a little tree. In this case, a seedling, a conifer seedling, which just has its first needles on it, a little stem, and down in the soil, probably the size of the roots resembles the size of the needles above the ground. Just think of them going down into the soil about as far. The rest of all that is the fungal hyphae that's extending out. You wouldn't be able to see it because it's so fine, but just think of how much more water and nutrients are available because the fungus can have all that contact, all that soil contact. So one tree, I mentioned many trees could be hooked together, but also one tree could have several species of fungi attached to different parts of its roots at the same time. And over the lifetime of the tree, different species of fungi might be attached to the tree. Wow, pretty cool, pretty complex too. These are some photographs. Okay, these are some photographs of mycorrhizae here, and move this so I can see better. This shows where the fungal mass is on the root tips, and it going out from here, it's not visible. I'm going to speed up a little bit here because I want to get to the edible part. This diagram shows you 4 blobs. The 3 of them have photos with it, and the 4th is not. The 4th one, the center of the Douglas fir, I didn't put a picture of a Douglas fir in there. There just wasn't room, but it has a mycorrhizal connection with the truffles, in this case, over on the right. So the green arrows indicate they're both benefiting from the relationship. Now drop down. This is a diagram of what's going on out there in the woods in one case, one kind of a little diagram. The spotted owl over here on the left, notice the red arrow going down here. It eats northern flying squirrels, and the flying squirrels eat the truffles. Well, the flying squirrels might poop out the spores of the truffles, and that benefits the truffles. So there's a green arrow there. When they get eaten, that could benefit them. And the spotted owl, when it eats the northern flying squirrel, also is picking up spores, and so it is benefiting the fungi by when it flies away and poops out the spores of the truffles. It's benefiting the fungi too. So here's that brilliant red flying amanita again, and the purple quartz again. And then lastly, fungi can be food that's eaten by other animals, eaten by humans, and it can vary. Before I go on here, it can vary in different cultures of humans have different approaches to fungi. We're somewhere in the middle. The English particularly have a long history of fearing fungi, but Eastern Europeans and Asians have long histories of using fungi. So eating fungi, there's a lot of species that are edible to us, quite a few, very few are deadly poisonous. Most of them are either don't do anything or just upset your stomach. See the Cascade Mycological Society for the edibility rules on how to first eat a fungus that you're not familiar with. And if you can, try to always cook fungi first because it helps break down those tough chitin walls and helps release all those wonderful nutrients for you. Here's a couple of examples of saprophytic fungi that are edible, the shaggy parasol, the shaggy mane. Here's another one, chicken of the woods, which grows on wood. Here, you can see it. My wife is sitting by it here. Here's a close-up. It's yellow underneath. Here's an edible parasitic fungus. Starts on a plain white mushroom called short-stemmed brevipeas. Only on that mushroom. If an orange coating mushroom hits it and grows the orange coating over the mushroom and inside the mushroom, it makes it much, much better. Tastes like lobster, looks like lobster, and they're easy to find, easy to eat around here. The golden chanterelle is perhaps one of our more famous mushrooms. This is kind of what you want when you come back from a foray, a nice basket full of golden chanterelles. The other really good one to eat around here is the king Boulay. And my friend Eugene there really is enjoying the one on the upper left. You want these nice young ones because the older they get, the more they expand, like the one on the left here that my wife is holding, they get full of these brown gunky areas. Fungus gnats are spreading bacteria and their own poop around inside the fungus, and it's no good anymore. So the young porcinos are the best. Matsutake is also a really yummy one. Grows both in the pines on the east side of the Cascades, a little bit on the west side of the Cascades, and then at the pines at the dunes. And if you find a candy stick plant, you know that there has to be matsutake around, because the candy stick plant right up here is only will grow on matsutake. And you may not see the matsutake mushrooms at the time. It may be the middle of summer, but you'll see the candy stick plant growing in a forest of conifers. You'll know that there has to be matsutake hidden under there because the candy stick only grows on the matsutake. So I'm going to try to wrap it up here kind of quick. Sauteing is a pretty good way to cook mushrooms. A lot of people use butter and cream and sherry. Some people use the holy trinity is sugar, salt, and soy or tamari. But I think they're even better oven roasted or barbecue grilled or broiled. Matsutake in particular is difficult to stir fry with or use like other mushrooms. It's best in Asian recipes. And it's really good under the broiler with just a little tamari on it. The CMS cookbook on the CMS website, Cascade Mycological Society, has lots of good ideas on cooking. To preserve mushrooms, because they all come in October and November, it seems like, and you want to eat them all year. So how do you preserve them? Drying is a great way. These are from our shelf. But you can also freeze them, pickle them, and make shrubs out of them. Shrub is a word with vinegar, an old-fashioned vinegar drink. And you can also soak them in vodka and things like that. And here's my last thought. The Oregon Mycological Society is online. They have a webpage. They're not doing events or their show this fall. They're based out of Portland. But if you're listening tonight from the Portland area, you might check out the Oregon Mycological Society and maybe consider becoming a member there too if you really like mushrooms. Down around Eugene here, we have the Cascade Mycological Society, and they also have a nice webpage. The 25th of October is our normal show date because it's a virtual festival this year. We're calling it a festival. That's not a typo. So the 25th, you can go to the CMS website, and on the 25th, watch a whole day long of recorded recordings on experts talking about fungi and cooking with fungi, lots of cooking tips. Then you can also join a naturalist and upload your mushroom photos. And if you do that around Lane County between October 16th and 24th, you'll be part of our show. It's the Lane County Myco Blitz. And we're actually going to have our mushroom show be an online show this year as part of the bigger mushroom festival. But the online part runs from the 16th through the 24th. So go to the iNaturalist website, sign up, upload your photos. And that is the end. Okay.
I see what you did there.
Not too subtle, I guess. Let's see, sharing, I'll turn that off.
Okay, thank you so much, Bruce. And And thanks for the shout out at the beginning to Wendell Wood as well. He was definitely one of my mentors. And I know it is sad to lose Freeman Rowe right at the beginning of mushroom season as well. Um, so, oh, sorry, Bruce, I couldn't hear you.
Freeman Rowe is going to comment. He wanted to make it to 90 years old, and he did by several days.
That's great. I wonder if you could attribute his long life to mushrooms.
Probably had something to do with that, or being out in the woods for sure.
Right, right. So I'm just going to speak for just a minute or two before we get into the questions. Again, I'm Chandra Legui with Oregon Wilds, and a lot of what you shared, Bruce, really brings home how important the work that Oregon Wild does to protect, healthy ecosystems across our forested landscape is, since that's, where all these fungi live. And all those mycelial connections found in forest soils, and the really important roles that fungi play, from decomposing our dead trees to helping the trees talk to each other, are just really important reasons to protect our last remaining natural forests in particular, or work to restore those elements in forests that have already been logged. So those are a couple of the primary ways that Oregon Wild looks at protecting fungal habitat. Just about 10 to 20% of our forests fit into the category of never having had bulldozers and logging equipment run over them, impacting their soil, the vegetation, and the trees. And many of these don't have protections that can, prevent further fragmentation of this amazing ecosystem and fungal world. In fact, we're looking at an increase in logging on our public lands under the Trump administration, as timber targets have gone up, and agencies like the Bureau of Land Management have a new management plan they've put in place. In many places, including up the McKenzie River, around Mount Hood, in Southern Oregon, and in the Coast Range foothills, this increase is really targeted at these last native forests that are over a century old. We're seeing increased clear-cutting proposals, both on the forest or on the Bureau of Land Management lands, especially. And as many of you know, Oregon Wild has staff who track these logging projects and comment on our supporters' behalf, urging the Forest Service and the BLM to use the best science to inform their decisions, to protect sensitive wildlife and waterways, and to consider the impacts of things like logging on our forests, on climate change. Sometimes we are successful in stopping the most egregious logging of our older forests, thanks to the public, many of you hopefully, who help us speak out for these places, so thank you. In the wake of the tragic wildfires we've all been dealing with that burned across Western and Southern Oregon this fall, we do anticipate a different type of damaging proposal that will impact mushroom habitat and a lot more, and that's post-fire logging. Post-fire logging can set back natural recovery, damage soils, and remove valuable wildlife habitat. And these are likely in development already, and we hope that with the support of folks like you out there, that our efforts will be successful in fighting off some of the worst proposals that could harm our forests in the coming months. So I'm going to leave it at that for now, because we do have a lot of great questions, and I want to try to get to as many as possible. I will note, because there are a lot of questions out there that I got that are about where can we find resources for the best gear, for beginners, for identifying edible mushrooms, for learning more about specific mushrooms, all this kind of stuff. And I think we're going to try to get to some of the bigger picture questions, but I will note that I dropped some links into the chat that you guys can cut and paste that have the resources that Bruce was talking about, the different mycological societies and the Mushroom Festival, and we'll make sure that those go out in the follow-up email to this webcast as well. And I think actually, if you email the Cascade Mycological Society, you might even get Bruce to answer your question. So there's a lot of great folks there. So I'm going to get to a couple things here. I guess one is a really interesting question that you might shed some light on, Bruce, and that is, why are mushroom spots so secret? They seem to be heavily guarded, and maybe more so than berry patches and medicinal plants. And and do you consider this a form of gatekeeping and privilege, or is there something else going on?
I'm going to divide it into two questions. One is commercial and non-commercial, because there are different kinds of mushroom pickers, and commercial pickers often are not respected well for what they do. But one of the things they have is definitely is turf issues. They're trying to make a living, basically, is the bottom line. It's a way for them to make a living, but some parts of it might be a little bit harsher than we'd like them to be. So they have some turf issues there, but I suspect what the question is more about is recreational pickers like myself, and maybe most of our audience tonight, the vast majority of our audience. Why are those sites so secret? I'm going to give you the difference between myself and my wife. She has a site that she has me swear to that I will never tell anyone where it is. She found it doing other work. She came across it out in the woods. It's not known we've never seen evidence of any other pickers there. And we've taken a few close friends there, but that will have to remain a secret site. For me, no matter which sites I've found, there's always 27 more sites that I don't have time to go to that I want to go to. So there's no shortage of sites for me. There is one site that I realize it's easy enough to access that a lot of people picking at that site. If I want to go, then there might not be much there for me. I think that's the main answer, is that people want to be sure that there's mushrooms at their site when they go there to pick. And if they tell other people might go. It doesn't matter if it happens a week or two before you go, there will still be mushrooms for you. If it happens a day or two before you go, it could influence what's there for you to pick. So that's why I think some people are loath to give out the information, is they don't want a lot of people to go out and then tell their friends and tell their friends to all go out to this great place. So.
Got it. Yes. We had some questions about whether what effects climate change might have on fungi in Oregon.
Well, like Amy Barrett, can I defer my answer on that? I don't really have an opinion. What affects my climate change? Well, it's complicated, and I don't really know. One of the things I've heard about climate change is that our winters might actually be wetter here. If we have wetter winters here, our fungi may do just fine, at least the ones in the urban area. And it's the mycorrhizal fungi are going to depend on the trees, what the trees do. If the trees are thinning out and unhealthy and not doing well because of the climate, the fungi might be the same, in the same boat. But the SAPROBIC fungi, the ones that can move around to suitable habitat by their spores move them around to suitable habitat. They'll just go where they need to go. And it's interesting. I mean, around each of us that's watching here tonight, there's dozens of fungal spores floating within 1 yard of your nose. You're breathing in fungal spores with every breath. So there's a lot of fungal spores around us, and many of those fungal spores are not fungal spores that produce fungi that produce mushrooms like I talked about tonight. A lot of them are molds and things like that. So yeah, I'm stalling. Yeah, there's not a really good, it's a tough question. It's a kind of a fuzzy question, and the answer is even fuzzier. But certainly fungi that need more moisture won't do as well in drier areas, and fungi that, the converse would also be true.
I'm sure there's just a lot more to learn about this too, right? And some of that will be through observation, and some hopefully will
E-
be through scientific research.
Even without climate change, there's so much to learn about fungi. And with climate change in there, that's another category.
Yeah. We also had a couple of questions, as you might expect, about how the recent fires might affect, the mycorrhizal connections, the soil, and is there uh, recovery that's, or restoration that's needed, or how will mushrooms fare?
I don't think we know enough to involve fungi in a recovery deliberately. We know a little bit about gardening and how to use fungi for garden plants. You can actually buy fungi mixes to stimulate garden plants. But as far as helping forests recover from fires, I don't think we're going to be able to do anything with fungi that'll really be helpful. Nothing that I can think of, nothing that I would know of. What has happened, if you saw the register guard yesterday, I know I'm old fashioned, I still look at newspapers, but if you somehow saw the map yesterday that showed the intensity of burning, that was really interesting because it actually, I have a question out to somebody else of why they call that a soil burn severity map and not a vegetation burn severity map. How do they know? But they're supposedly the intent of this map shows hot areas of soil, medium areas of soil, and low burn areas of soil. And I would expect in the hot areas of soil where there's fewer trees, that there's also going to be fewer fungi, both because the fungi overheated if it's closer to the surface and because its exchange of nutrients is cut off because the trees have been killed. So if new trees germinate there, remember all those fungal spores floating around everywhere? Well, they're there. When the new trees germinate, if the new fungal spores are in the right habitat at the right time, they'll find their way there. That's how they've done it before. But the larger the area of severe burn, the longer it's going to take for things to come back.
I feel like there are some mushrooms that seem to do better in burned areas. You want to comment on that?
Can I add on that? Yes,
Yeah.
there is one certainly. I didn't talk about morels tonight because of seasonality. Morel mushrooms are actually quite popular. Very good eating mushroom. You do need to be a little bit careful with them. You certainly don't want to eat them raw. You must cook morels because they have some substances in them that basically is rocket fuel, monomethyl hydrazine. You don't want to ingest that raw. When you cook it, it cooks off. Ideally, you want to cook it with the window open so it goes outside somewhere. But morels grow only in the spring, and there are a suite of morels that grow really, really well after fires. So guess where I'm going to be next spring? I'm going to be up looking in the fire burned areas for morels. So some of those morels have been sterilized and killed by the fires. Some of them are going to thrive, I think, in those burned areas. We'll see.
I know we're not going to talk about specific spots or maybe specific mushrooms and spots, but some people are wondering if you have any rules of thumb on, seeking out good places to look for mushrooms.
It really depends on what you want. If you want to seek out a SAPROBIC mushroom, you don't need to go to the woods. If you're going to look for shaggy parasols or shaggy means, if you're going to find those, you might well find them right around town here somewhere. You just don't want to find them in an area that's got pesticides in it or fertilizers that have been added because that's going to be in the mushroom. So if it's your own yard and you haven't used anything and you've got shaggy manes, call me. That's a real good safe place to pick those mushrooms. Yeah.
Great. And I know, when I get out hiking in, older forests, which are my favorite, I see a lot of more diversity, I would say, of different mushrooms coming up, especially in the fall. Not necessarily edible ones, but a huge diversity. And I tend to see, things like golden chanterelles and maybe younger forests. But that's, Yes. Oh, yes. You were going to show us the mushrooms. Show us.
Well, I'm going to show you one kind of mushrooms. This is a pink-edged chanterelle. It's one of the kinds of golden chanterelles. This is the one that grows with spruce trees. And in fact, we found these at the base, not right at the base, but within 30 feet of Engelmann spruce trees in the Cascades up Highway 58 at about 5,000 feet. So if you know anything about the spruce, and it's good to know, if you're going to be a mushroomer, it's good to know your trees too, right? Because if you know that a really good early season chanterelle, like the pink edge chanterelle, only grows with Engelmann spruce, and you know Engelmann spruce is only going to grow where it's kind of moist, then you go like, oh, I was hiking last summer in an area that was kind of moist up there with Engelmann. I think I'll go check there, and you'll probably find some of these. These do have it's kind of hard to see, I think, on computer light here, and because these are a few days old, but they do have an edge here that's pinker than regular chanterelles. Very firm, very stocky. Because it's early season, my wife loves to cook with these because they're not full of water like a sponge. The later in the season chanterelles get, and a lot of other mushrooms too, the more water in them, and it's harder to cook with them. I use the technical term slime out. They get really slimy and full of water later. So these early ones are nice and dry and firm and great to cook with. So yeah, I would say Engelmann spruce high up in the Cascades right now would be great to get these.
Cool.
Oh, they smell lovely. They smell like apricots, kind of.
You're making me hungry. Someone commented that they were having some dried chanterelles from last year for dinner right now.
Oh, nice.
I think we would be remiss in, no one asked about this, but I think we would be remiss in not mentioning permits that might be required for recreational mushroom pickers. I know that it's usually something you talk about when we have our mushroom outings. So could you touch on that?
You basically need a permit wherever you want to pick. Not many people pick on private land, but you need permission from the landowner if you're going to do that. And on federal lands, down here in Eugene, we have 4 forests that are working together a little bit. The Willamette, Umpqua, Deschutes, and Fremont, where you can get one permit that covers all 4 forests. If you're picking less than a gallon of mushrooms, you're allowed to do that without any permit at all. If you want to get 2 gallons of mushrooms, however big that is, you do need a permit, but it's free. Anything more than that, they automatically throw you into a commercial category, and you have to pay $100. So what I usually do is go with the free permit, but the 2 gallons. And I don't know what the Mount Hood National Forest policy is. Sayusa National Forest on the Coast Range, they have a policy that you can have up to a gallon per day for free, or you go commercial. The state parks on the coast, there's some wonderful Boulay picking in state parks, like in the pines, where if you're up on the high areas of pines where it's high and dry, it's great matsutake hunting. If you go over the dunes and down into the deflation plain where it's moist, when there are pines growing there, there's boletes there. So either habitat there is a great place to pick. The regional directors for state parks have their own policies for mushroom picking. In general, commercial harvesting is not allowed, although that is often ignored by some commercial harvesters out there. So here at Honeyman and Tugman and the other state parks, our regional director should be called ahead of time just to be sure, but because they might change from year to year, but they're pretty good and they allow you to do recreational harvesting, a couple of gallons, no permit, but call them ahead, just make sure. So yeah, there are permits involved, especially if you're going for more quantities. One problem with mushrooms is around here, they're only out for a couple of months. When you find them, you want to get a whole bunch. So you're going to have to figure out how you're going to deal with that. You're going to pay the $100 to get a commercial permit or break the law. I'm not advocating for breaking the law, so do what you need to do.
2 gallons is with a free permit is still quite a lot of mushrooms. So yeah,
and you're allowed 10 days a year doing that too. So that's 20 gallons. My math is decent.
Yeah, so that's the tip, is contact, your local Forest Service office to find out what you need to get basically and how to do that. And I will.
It's actually easier right now because of COVID. They don't want you to come in. And before I've gone in and they go, oh, geez, the permit person isn't here. You'll have to come back. Instead, you just call them like at a ranger station and they take the information and mail you the permit within a couple of days. It's great.
Yeah, that works pretty well. And I will note, since Oregon Wild is a wilderness advocate organization, you're not allowed to pick mushrooms from a designated wilderness area. So Three Sisters
Correct.
Wilderness, Waldo Lake Wilderness, um, the Drift Creek
Campgrounds
Wilderness on
also,
the coast,
yeah,
and
campgrounds
campgrounds,
also are
right?
often, yeah.
So, so please keep that in mind and follow the rules. We've got a few minutes over and we've answered a bunch of questions. Thank you so much, Bruce. I think we're gonna
Thank
call it
you.
a night. Again, folks out there, we'll send out the recording and some of these resources for you so that you can find out more. It's a lifelong exploration, isn't it, Bruce?
It is, absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your night.